Welcome to the 7th video in this Getting Started series. In this video, much like the last one, we'll be focusing on Aspire only features. This time around, it'll be on the custom shape creation features and how we can use those interactively right in our 3D view to build your own 3D model or relief carving, just like I did on this little plaque right here. Let's jump right into the software.
Okay, I've gone ahead and opened up Aspire, and we're going to open an existing file. So we're going to go and find the file called Sweet Dreams Bedroom Door Sign.crv3d, and we'll open that up into our software. Now I'm starting with an already created file because if you've been following along with this Getting Started series, you should already know how to do a lot of this already. And the focus of this video is on creating a 3D model in Aspire, so that's what we'll be really focusing on. So as you can see right away, we have two different sheets here, and you can find those in our Sheets tab over here. We have one called Walnut and one called Maple. And if you look at our Sheets dropdown, it's reflected up here as well. Now the idea of having two different materials is that I want this plaque, the background of this plaque, including the stars, the green stars, and the Sweet Dreams text, will actually be cut into a piece of dark walnut, where the insert, that's this little 3D model area here, will actually be done in a nice light maple that I can glue into a pocket. What'll be nice about this is I could actually put this into production if I wanted to. I could have this a bunch of backgrounds already cut, and then I could have a series of different maple inserts, maybe one with a rocket ship on it, one with the cloud and the moon, maybe one with a shooting star on it, that I could then go ahead and cut as I need them and then put them into my plaque and finish everything off. So this would be a nice little project that I could go ahead and make for friends, family, or even sell if I wanted to in the end. Okay, so let's have a look at the overall project setup here by looking at our job dimensions. Now because there's two sheets in here, then we're going to be looking at this as an overview of the full project. So it's a single-sided project. We have sheets with various widths and various heights. They share the same thickness, so 0.75 an inch. On both sheets, I'm going to be zeroing off my material surface. My datum will be set to the bottom left-hand corner for both of these sheets. And I'm choosing a very high modeling resolution. That's because I want the best pixel density I can for each one of these sheets. So the area that I'm going to be modeling needs to take up the majority of the job sheet. That way I can make use of as many pixels as I can. And that's really why I went ahead and decided to cut the insert on its own sheet. That's quite a bit smaller than this one, because if I had modeled it on this larger sheet, then I would be wasting all of these pixels and only using a very few over here. So out of that 4 million, I may have only been using 1 million pixels, and that's not quite enough to get the detail that I'd like to. Or in the future, if I decide to make a little bit more detailed model, I definitely wouldn't have enough pixels. So this kind of a setup using a custom sized sheet for the job that you'll be modeling is an important sort of workflow thing you're going to want to think about as you're going on your 3D modeling journey. So we're just going to go ahead and click cancel here. Now, if I go ahead and look at each individual sheet, I can select them out of my drop down here. I'll just right click on the walnut and go into edit. You'll see that this is where I can actually get access to the dimensions of this particular sheet. So it's 13 by 6 by 3/4 of an inch. If I decided I wanted to change where I was going to be zeroing off this particular sheet, I could. Same with the datum for this particular sheet. I could change it if I'd like to. Still maintaining that very high modeling resolution. And my material setup for this is walnut. So that'll be a nice visual representation. I'm looking at my 3D models to see what material I'm going to be cutting this into. So I can just go ahead and click cancel. And if I go ahead and look at the maple one, let's right click on that and go into edit. You'll see that it's 5 by 5. The thickness is the same. I'm zeroing off my material surface. The datum's in the same spot. Again, using that very high modeling resolution. And because I have a smaller sheet, then I'm going to actually be packing more pixels into this circle, which will give me a much more detailed model in the end once I get done modeling it. When I'm creating those shapes, they're going to be nice and crisp looking because I've got lots of pixels to work with. And if I look at my material settings, you'll see that it's Canadian maple. So I can go ahead and click OK. Let's go back to our Design tab, and let's start to think about how we're going to model this. Okay, so over here in our modeling tools, this first row, we've got some shape creation tools that we can use. So the first one is to create a flat plane. The second one is to create a rounded shape. The third one is to create an angular shape. The fourth one is to create a smooth shape. And the fifth one is to create a custom shape. Now I'm not going to touch on all of the different options that are available for all of these different shapes, but there will be some related videos for each one of these that will be really helpful if you want to do a deep dive into those or to build on your modeling skills. So I think the first shape we're going to start out with is going to be the cloud, and that's a pretty easy one. So if we go over to our 3D view, you can see that in our 3D view we've got our vectors showing. If you don't see your vectors there, you can just hide and show your vectors with that button right there. And we can select that vector and we'll go straight into our create a rounded shape component option. You'll see here that with all of these shape creation tools, we have a dialog set up with all kinds of different options that we have available. And then also in our 3D view, as this shape starts to evolve, we'll start to add different tools to that right in your 3D view, which in a lot of cases is much more convenient than going over to your form. So the first thing we're going to do is to choose an angle that we want to create this dome shape with. So if I hold down my left mouse button and I drag up my screen, you'll see that a shape will start to appear based on that closed vector that I chose. So I can go ahead and choose a positive shape or a negative shape if I'd like to, but in this case I'd like to make that a nice positive puffy cloud shape. And I think what I'd also like to do is have sort of a flat top along the face of my shape. So to do that, as soon as I create that initial kind of domey puffy shape, up will pop this other handle here, and this will control my limit. So the limit that I'm going to create this dome to, and if it's indicated here and it's also indicated over here in your form. If I just go ahead and left click on that and then drag down, you'll see that the top of my shape will start to flatten off and I'll get a rounded shape with a flat top on it, and that looks really good. Now if you find that sometimes your vectors are obscuring your shape creation, again you can go and hide those so you can get a better sense of what's going on here. That's perfect. It's a nice shape for my cloud, I think. I like that a lot. So now let's go on to our next component that we're going to want to make, and that's going to be the moon. So I'm going to select that. And because I hadn't closed down my create round shape dialog, it's staying up there for me, so I can go ahead and start right away creating a nice round shape. And for this one, I don't want to put a flat top on it. I just want to create a nice little round shape that looks kind of like a moon. And that looks all right. I think it looks really good. Maybe we want to put a little bit more angle to it, make it a little more puffy. There we go, that looks all right. Let's just go ahead and rotate back around again to where I need to be. Now to rotate this, I just need to hold down my right mouse button in the 3D space, and I can go ahead and rotate that. Or I can use my view control here by left clicking on that and moving it around if I would like to. Now you'll notice that the way that these two different shapes are combined isn't quite exactly what we want. The moon is being added on top of the cloud. So I can adjust that right here with my floating properties. I'll just need to click that, left click it, and move it out of the way for a minute. And I can choose the combine mode I'd like to have. And in this case, I like to change it to a merge component. That way it merges into my cloud. That looks really great. And let's close that down. Let's just off click for right now, and let's hide our vectors so we can get a better sense of what's going on here. Now, that looks really good. I think it's a great start. The moon, though, is still merging into our cloud a little bit too much. So let's select that cloud component, and I'm going to add a bit of base height to that. And what that will do is it'll add a base behind my shape, and I can just kind of push that up so it rises just above the moon a little bit. That looks pretty good. I might want to add a little bit more to that, because I think what I want to do is I want to grab my moon shape and again add a bit of base height to that just to give it a little bit of an edge. As my tool comes along and cuts that, it needs to jump up a little bit. And that'll give me a little bit of definition there that I might want to have. So let's off click that. And that looks great. And we can close down our create round shape dialog, because I think that's it for round shapes right now. Let's bring back up our vectors again, and let's just go ahead and choose all of our stars. Now, of course, stars I think should be nice and pointy. So we have another option for that here. We can create a angular shape. So let's choose that. And again, we're going to start off by choosing an angle for that shape, and we're just going to go ahead and rise it up or push it up. And you'll see that our stars get nice and pointy looking. Again, we can hold down our right mouse button and look around that a little bit. Those look really good. I like to make use, though, of a feature of this create angle shape that I don't get access to down here. And that's over here. It's called preserve internal corners. So that'll make some of these internal corners a little bit sharper looking. So if I click that, you'll see that it'll update in a second to have nice sharp corners there in the middle. A little bit better than before. I think that's really great. So let's just go ahead and close this down. Now, even with that dialog closed down, I can still go ahead and add some base height. Let's just go ahead and add a little bit of base height to those shapes. And again, that way when my tool comes along and cuts those, it'll actually have to put a little bit of a detail around the outside edge of that, which will look quite nice. I think it looks really good. Let's look back down on that again, and let's hide our vectors and have a look at that. Yeah, I think that's perfect. Great, okay. The next thing I want to think about is adding the round disc shape to the back. So before we do that, I want to go and look at my component tree up here. So there's two different ways I can do that. I can go to my tab over here and look at my components, or I can go ahead and use my component drop down. Now, while I was building my shapes, I didn't bother to go ahead and name them, but now is probably a good time to go back and think about that. So I'm going to select this bottom component, right click on it, and I'm going to rename that, and I'm going to call that cloud. And you'll see that when I select that, then it turns red or it changes color in my 3D view, so I know which one I've actually selected. Let's go ahead and choose this one. That's the moon. And you'll see that the icon next to it reflects the idea that it's being merged into my cloud. Let's right click on that or rename that moon. And then we're going to choose this last one. We'll right click on that and we'll rename this one stars. Okay. And what we'll do is we're going to rename this level. We're just going to call it details. No, we'll call it design. That's better. Perfect. And then what I want to do is I want to add in a new level, and we're going to call this base. So we're going to rename this base. And I'm going to create the base shape or that disc shape on this level so that I just only need to change. If I decide that I want to add a different design, I could go ahead and just create a new level and then put my other design, like I said, my rocket ship maybe on that. I could hide this one and just show the rocket ship design and recalculate my tooling, and everything would be fine. So we're going to go with base. We'll turn back on our vectors. We'll grab this shape. And we're going to go ahead again and choose to create a rounded shape. Okay, we're going to start out by giving it an angle, of course, and we're going to give it quite an aggressive angle because what we want to do is the same sort of thing that we did with the cloud is we want to give it a flat top. That way everything can lay nice and flat on it. And you'll see that I'm creating that flat top. As I move that down, you can see the top flattening out. And I want to bring it to right about there. I think that looks pretty okay. That's great. Wonderful. Okay. Now let's close this down. Now what I want to do is I want to scale this entire composite model to be a certain thickness. I think it needs to be about 1/4 inch. So first of all, let's grab that disc in the background and we're going to scale it up to be just a little bit more than that. Let's bring it up to about, I don't know, maybe, yeah, 0.8 is good. Okay, that way when we go ahead and scale everything together, it'll end up, I'll still have a nice shape on the background here. So let's look down the top of that for a second. To do that, what I'm going to do is off-click everything and go over here to Scale Z Height of Model. So anything that's visible in my 3D view, I'm going to scale up, and I'm going to set an exact height, and I'm going to make this exact height 0.25 of an inch. And when I click Apply, everything will be scaled. I can close this down. And then I can click OK here. And now that's exactly 1/4 inch thick, which is perfect for what I'd like to have. Okay, The next thing we're going to want to do now is to think about modeling the actual plaque. So let's go to our walnut sheet. Just click on that. That'll bring us over to our walnut sheet. We can off-click that. Now, again, what we want to do is we're going to create a custom shape for the outside edge of this. We're going to V-carve any of the details in the top, and we're going to pocket out a hole to put our disc into that we just designed. And you'll see that it's quite a bit oversized. That's because I want to make sure that this is going to fit in there perfectly. And also, I don't mind having a little bit of a lip there. That way, I'll be able to have a little place to catch maybe some of my finish in there. And it'll give me a nice contrast between these two parts. And I think that'll be quite nice in the end. So now, let's have a look at creating my actual plaque shape. So there's a couple different ways we're going to look at this, and we'll choose the best result. So first of all, we're going to hold down my Shift key, and we're going to select these two outside vectors. And then we're going to go into our Create a Smooth Shape tool. Now with a lot of these tools, what we kind of like you to do is actually just play around with them a bit. So using the Create a Smooth Shape tool, we've got a couple options at the top here. We have a top smoothing and a base smoothing, and you can see we can bulge out the top of our shape, we can concave in or bulge out the bottom of our shape. We have a limit plane like we had with our dome that we created earlier, or our disk that we created. We can preserve internal corners if we'd like to, and we can blend to inner vectors. We can scale it, and all these options are the same as they are for any other tool that we have. The one I want to point out though, or the three I do, are going to be these top two handles here in this blend to inner shape. So first of all, if we just start to play around with these shapes for a second, as soon as I do, we'll get a shape that will be created. Now, this isn't what I want. What I want to do is have a shape that raises up to a very flat plane. So I want to make sure I blend to my internal vector. Okay. And then you can see that I can change the top shape of this. It's probably easier if I look at it from the edge and hide my vectors. And you kind of watch the edge here. I can change the way the top is. I can also go ahead and change the way the base is, so I can concave it in. You'll see that it creates this kind of an S shape depending on the settings that I have here. And you can play around with these until you get exactly what you want. So let's go ahead and take a look at the top again. Now, this is getting there. You know, it's not a bad shape, and I think if I messed around with these enough, I probably could get something that looked cloud-like, because I like to sort of carry the cloud motif around. But I'd like to play around with another option if I could. So let's just close this down. Let's just delete that out of there for a second. And let's bring back up my vectors. I like to look at creating this shape with a custom cross section. This shape, I could have definitely have created that S kind of shape if I wanted to. But I couldn't have created a shape like this, which is kind of like with 3 bumps on it. But I can with my Create a Custom Shapes tool. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key, select those 2 closed internal vectors, and then also grab my cross section. That's an open vector that defines sort of the outside shape of it and then drops down to my base again. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. If I go ahead and create or click create, you'll see what happens. I get this kind of a interesting shape. So it's actually going down that this shape is on this half, and then there's another half that's the opposite shape. So it is a neat result, but it's not exactly what I want. I'd like to blend to inner vector and then try that again. That is perfect. I think that's exactly what I was hoping for. And of course, I can scale it. I can change my shape height if I want to. I can modify or add some base height if I'd like to. I've got my floating properties dialog as well, where I get access to some extra tools, tilt and fade and so on. And then I also have the limit height if I want to. So let's just close this down. I think that's perfect. Let's close this shape down. Look back down the top of it again. Let's hide my vectors. Yes, I'm really happy with that. I think that's going to be the perfect shape for what we need. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm actually going to pocket out this circle here so that I have a recess for my disk that I'm going to create. And then I'm going to V-carve in all these extra details on the top. So I think pretty much we have everything that we need to go ahead and start developing some toolpaths for these. So let's jump back to our maple sheet and create our toolpaths for our disk here. So like I mentioned before, I'm not going to get too deep into creating toolpaths for this. If you watched the last video, which I hope that you did, you would have seen me create a lot of these toolpaths, the same style toolpaths as before. So I'm just going to point out the things that are important or different about these ones. So let's go ahead and jump over to our Toolpaths tab. As always, let's look at our material setup. Everything is pretty good here, 0.75 inch material thickness. But my datum is going to be the bottom left, zeroing off my material surface. My model position, though, I think that if I leave it at the very top of my material, I'll end up having too much backing, and it's going to make this part way too thick. So I'm going to drop this down 1/4 inch. So that means I'm going to need to pocket off 1/4 inch of material from the top of my disc before I actually get into my carving of my relief. But that's okay. I think that'll end up giving me a nicer sort of thickness of disc in the end. So we're going to go with that. Our wrap Z-gaps and our home start position are safe and appropriate for my machine. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now the first toolpath I'm going to create is going to be my roughing toolpath. So with this vector selected, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to be using a 1/8 inch end mill. I'm going to use my selected vector as my boundary. I'm going to go outside of that at least 1/8 of an inch. So I'll just go put 1 divided by 8 and press equals on my keyboard. I'm going to leave a bit of material behind so that I have something to remove with my finishing pass. Z-level roughing is going to be perfect. And we're just going to call this roughing, and we'll calculate that. We'll preview our visible toolpath, and as always, when you're looking at your preview, if things don't look quite right, this is the time that you can go ahead and fix them. Yeah, it looks really great. So let's go ahead and look back down that again. Let's close this down, and let's go move on to our finishing toolpath. We are going to not use this 1/8 inch ball nose. We're going to remove that, and we're going to select a tapered ball nose right here. Okay, so my popper material selected. I'll be using our Onefinity machine, so it's selected. So these feeds and speeds are safe and appropriate for this cutter in the material that I'm using with this machine. We are going to use the selected vector. We'll be using a boundary offset of 0.0625. And we're going to use offset tooling. And we are going to use a step over retract of 0.01. That will help to alleviate any sort of line dwell marks that might show up as my tool moves out. And we'll just call this 3D finish, and we'll calculate that. Again, if there's anything in the toolpath setup that I haven't touched on, you've got lots of other videos you can watch, and there's also our inline help that will give you a hand with all that. And again, with our 3D preview, that looks pretty good, but I'm actually going to go back into my finishing toolpath for a second. I'm going to edit that tool, and I'm going to change my step over to be 8% instead of 10% of my finishing pass. So we're going to go ahead and recalculate that, and then reset our preview, and then we'll preview both of those again. Now why I had chosen to do that is because there was some extra cusping around the outside edges here I wanted to get rid of, and being able to adjust that step over on the fly with this tool, modifying its settings just for this particular toolpath, is really super helpful in the end by using that edit feature when you choose your tool. So we're going to close this down. That looks great. The next thing I want to do is to put on the faces on these guys. So let's look right down on that. Let's hide our components for a second, and let's just go ahead and group select and hold down my shift key. I can grab all of those vectors that I want to do. And for these, I'm going to use a profile toolpath. I'm going to have a start depth of 0, but I want to make sure that I show my advanced toolpath options for this, because I want to make use of projecting this onto my 3D component. So my start depth is going to be 0. My cut depth is going to be 0.02. We're going to go ahead and select a different tool because we want to just use that same tapered ball nose that we had in there already. That's great. We're going to go on those lines. This is all fine, and we're going to project that onto our 3D model because we want to make sure that it actually follows the contours of our moon and falls on the face of our cloud. So we'll calculate that, and we'll preview our visible toolpath. Ah, that looked great. I'm really happy with that. I think they should look really fun. That's great. Close that down. The last thing we need to do is just create a cutout path. So with this outside vector selected, we're going to use that same profile toolpath. Start depth of 0, we're going to go all the way through our material plus a little bit. We're going to choose a different bit. We're going to select the 1/8 inch end mill up here. We'll select that, and we are going to go outside that line. We need to add in some tabs. So we can edit our tabs, and we're going to let the software do the work for us. We're going to tell it we want 4 tabs, and we're going to add those tabs in. Let's put those tabs where they belong. We can close that down, go back to our 3D view. That's great, and we can go ahead now and call this cutout, and we can calculate that. And it's just telling us or warning us that we're going to cut through our material. I know that's going to happen, so we're just going to click OK, and let's preview that visible toolpath. And that looks good. Nice. Okay. Let's go ahead now and go close this down and go to our walnut sheet so we can go ahead and do the toolpaths for that. Okay, perfect. So the first thing I want to do is check our material setup again. In this case, it's going to be the material is still 3/4 of an inch. Datum is the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to put our model right at the very top of our material. I want it to be the full thickness. That way I can hang it on my wall, or hopefully there'll be enough flat base here so I can actually use it on a bureau or on a dresser if I would like to as a stand-up thing. These rapid Z-gaps and the home start position are safe and appropriate for my machine. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And now we're going to start off by doing a roughing pass. So I'm going to hide my model for a second. I'm going to choose these 2 vectors. I actually only want to cut between these 2 vectors. This face will actually be on the top of my material. So I'm going to try and have my material as flat as I can so that it will look right. If there's any variation in that, I might see a bit of a line around the top of my toolpath here, but that's okay. I can just sand that out quite easily. So let's put back on our 3D components again. Let's go to our roughing pass. We're going to use that 1/8 inch end mill. We're going to cut between the selected vectors. We've got a slight boundary offset. We're leaving a little bit of machining allowance behind. Z-level roughing's perfect, and we're just going to go ahead and call this roughing, and we'll calculate that. And we can preview the visible toolpath. That's perfect. Let's close this down. Now we're going to do our finishing pass. We're going to use those same vectors. We're going to remove that out of there. We're going to select that tapered ball nose. We'll select that. That's fine. We're going to use the selected vectors. We're going to go outside that again, just a little bit. And then we are going to use a raster toolpath. Oh, sorry, an offset toolpath. So we want it to go around the outside of this, and we're going to call this 3D finish. And we can calculate that. And we can preview the visible toolpaths. That looks really good. I like that a lot. Let's close this down. Now we're going to want to go ahead and create our pocket. So let's hide our 3D components again. Let's grab this vector right here and show our 3D components. We'll create a pocket toolpath. We're going to go down 1/4 inch. That would be pretty good, I think. We're going to use that 1/8 inch end mill we had. Offset tooling, that'll be perfect. And we're just going to call this pocket. We can calculate that. Preview that visible toolpath. That'll give us a nice hole to put that disc into, glue it nicely into. Perfect. Close this down. Again, let's hide our 3D components and let's select all of these other vectors. So we'll grab the stars. They've been grouped together for us. That's perfect. Let's grab our text. We'll add a V-carve toolpath to this. Start depth to 0. We're not going to worry about a flat depth. Let's show our 3D components again. We're going to use a 60-degree V-bit for that. We don't need a clearance tool. We don't need to project it onto our 3D component because that should be the surface of our material. We'll call this V-carving, and we'll calculate it. Continue anyway. That just told us that there was some, could potentially be some problems there with our text, but I just not worried about that. We're going to ignore it and we'll see what we have. If it doesn't look right in our preview, then we may need to go back and change our vectors, but I think we'll be all right. So let's preview that visible tooling. Oh, it's perfect. And I see I made a spelling mistake here. So let's right click on that. We will rename that, get rid of that E. There we go. Perfect. That looks really good. The last toolpath we need to do is to create a cutout toolpath. So again, let's hide this. Let's grab that outside vector, show our 3D components again, do a profile toolpath, start depth to 0. We want to go all the way through our material, so Z plus 0.02 of an inch. We're going to use that 1/8 inch end mill we had. We're going to cut outside. That's perfect. We're going to add in some tabs. So we're going to edit our tabs. We're probably going to need about 4 at least. So we'll get the software to add the tabs in where it thinks they need to be. That's not bad. My only problem is I don't want a tab on the bottom of my part because I want to have a nice flat surface. So I'm just going to hold down my left mouse button over top of this tab, and I'm just going to drag it along that vector and place it where I want it to be. And I can do that with all of these vectors, or all these tabs, excuse me. If I go ahead and double click, I can add in a tab. I don't want to put any tabs on these because they're going to be hard to remove, so I'll just put a couple tabs there. That should be lots of tabs. So let's close that down. Those tab dimensions are correct. Let's just go ahead and call this cutout. And we'll calculate that. Again, it's warning us that we're going to cut through our material, but we know that. Let's preview our visible toolpaths. That's perfect. Now, just like we've done in the past, we're going to go ahead and save off all of our toolpaths onto a USB drive, and then we can get into actually cutting them on our machine in the labs. So I'll catch up with you then.
Okay, we're back in the labs again. I've got my toolpath saved on my USB drive, and this time I'm going to get my G-code from my PC over to the controller software for the Onefinity machine. I've got my 2 pieces of material all ready to go. I've got my piece of walnut for the plaque and the maple for the round insert that we're going to make. So we're ready to go there. So my next step right now is to go over and turn on the CNC machine, make sure that this material is secured to the wasteboard, and then I can start cutting. Now before I do that, I'm going to need to make sure that I'm comfortable and familiar with the controller software that comes along with the Onefinity machine. And if you're not with your machine, then I suggest that you go online. A lot of different machine tool manufacturers have that information available for you right there. So get comfortable before you start cutting. So here we go. Okay, so I've already gone ahead and set my XY datum to where I have the arrow on the piece of maple. Moved it back just a little bit, and this is where I'm going to set my Z0. Now, because this machine doesn't have a touch plate, I'm going to use the old-fashioned paper method, which literally is me taking the piece of paper, putting it on the material, and nudging down the bit until it just barely touches it, or I can move it, or I just can't quite move it, actually, the paper. And that will let me know that it's only the thickness of a piece of paper away from the top of my wood. And I'm going to do that every time I go ahead and change out my bit instead of using a touch plate. Now once I get done cutting the maple, we're going to move directly into cutting the piece of walnut for the plaque. So hopefully when this is all said and done, we should have the 2 parts ready to go together. the way that turned out. That's really quite fun. And all I did was put a really basic few sand and sealer coats on it, sanded between each coating. And that you know, it really does make everything pop right out. It looks really great. Now, as you saw in the video, I showed you how to use the shape creation tools in the 3D view to create this lovely little relief model here on the edge. And also we talked a little bit about how you could swap this disc out and put in a different disc. So this could almost be something you could sell in a shop if you wanted to. Well, I hope you enjoyed that series of getting started videos. There's a lot more training content available at vectric.com. And if you're interested, every month we give out a free project which helps to build on the things that you've already learned through this whole series. Have fun. Keep cutting. We want to see what you're making, so make sure you post it and tag us in it. See you soon.